So continuing our discussion on ghettos and enclaves, you recall again, one of the distinctions between the two is the degree of choice that you have to live in these communities. Where a ghetto, again, it's very isolated. It's usually one group. An enclave will have, some group membership, but it's a little bit more diverse in terms of ethnic representation. It may be all white, but within that white neighborhood, you're going to have Irish, Italians, some Jewish cats, etc. We discussed how, again, a lot of these neighborhoods were constructed through a process called chain migration. And again, listen to the concept just as it sounds, with a chain that has links, and one person may begin the link, and then you have successive pathways and generations of immigration, generally across families or communities or things of that nature. One person comes over from Italy and gets a job in New York. They get themselves squared away. They send for their family members 2, 3 years later. Some more family comes later that year, et cetera, et cetera. The ghettos, again, were a bit different because, again, like we talked about, all these people are coming as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And you have, all this cheap labor that's flooding into these cities, especially up north. And there was, a lot of consternation about where they're going to live. Again, you have all these people coming all at once. A lot of folks in particular were not thrilled to have a lot of these new Black folks that were coming from South Carolina, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, living near them. So a lot of these folks were isolated, and these places would quickly devolve into ghettos. And again, as I said, not every Black neighborhood was a ghetto, and not every ghetto was Black. There were some white ghettos. There were some white ghettos. Make no mistake about it. Hell's Kitchen in New York, for example, which you may have heard about, that was, a neighborhood full of a bunch of poor white kids back in the 1940s, 50s, etc. But what whites have the opportunity to do is assimilate and blend into the larger society in a way that kind of curbs some of the discrimination that early Italians felt and that Black people continue to feel throughout, unfortunately. This led, again, to very segregated cities. And when we talk about segregation, there are 5 aspects to that. As always, start to prepare yourself for the quiz and final exam. Don't only approach the class and thinking about those things, but obviously you would behoove yourself to consider how you're going to perform on these assessments. And again, there's unevenness in terms of the population balance, where you just have one group more than another. This is very isolated from the city. So we talked about, again, that people come for jobs and other resources. And a lot of times, the ghettos would be deeply isolated, very far away from some of those most valued resources. This includes things like not only jobs, but healthcare. Think about this again in ghettos that you've seen either in cities that you live in or cities that you visit. You've all seen a ghetto and are familiar with ghettos. And a lot of times there may not be like a hospital. Like one of the major aspects, in fact, about trying to build a hospital, the Waverly Hospital, is to have healthcare directly in the hood where, poor and working class people live. Oftentimes, if somebody gets sick or something, they got to go way out. Like, people literally die because they can't get good access to healthcare near them. They're isolated from that. They're isolated from good, healthy places to eat. You have a lot of cluster, a lot of people really on top of each other. As we talked about in other sociology classes, whenever, again, you have a lot of congestion like that, it's going to breed a little bit more hostility, competition, and it's just not the most comfortable way to live. There are some cities, though, that became hyper-segregated. And no one's been more hyper-segregated than Black folks. And this really happened through the development of project high rises. So people coming up again, and let's look at the historical patterns and make sure you're understanding this. Don't just write stuff down. Please, 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 please listen, understand, and critically analyze. So
Dr.
again,
Muhammad,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Deshaun.
that had to be the most racist thing I have ever read in my life about them doggone with that funding they was doing and how they built the highway away from the city. And then with them even, man, you read my paper, boy, I'm talking I'm talking as a black person, but that was the most racist thing I have ever read in my life. Like, I have never heard of nothing like that. Like, I never knew or understood that they did it. And then when black people started to migrate out of the city with them, that urban the renewal playing out, that was crazy.
Absolutely. And I want you all to be mindful about this. That's a very good observation, Deshaun. Very good. One extra credit point for that observation, in fact, and making that connection. But one of the things I really want y'all to be mindful about is that even though we're talking about these processes starting in the 1920s, a lot of this stuff is still happening. So you all, again, are going to be property owners yourselves pretty soon. And I really want you to pay close attention to some of these things. Again, no matter where you decide to live, property and where you own land and where you own housing and where you put your own families is really important. But as Deshaun was speaking to, there have been a lot of processes put in place by the urban planners to kind of create ghettos. It ain't like these things that just happen. And one of the things, again, so you had people coming up in the 1920s and stuff, a lot of Black people, they will funnel them into, again, these, isolated areas in New York, Detroit, Philadelphia, St. Louis, DC, etc. But eventually, they decided to begin building project high rises. Again, so through federal housing programs, their solution to this, and again, please make sure you hear me, because at some point, I'm not gonna ask you just, hey, define hypersegregation. Tell me what the five aspects of unevenness, of segregation are. You need to know those things, but more than anything else, I want you to understand these processes, particularly again, is Black people, because we try and go off of evidence. We don't try to. We go off of evidence in social sciences, and the evidence that supports that these are racist policies, as Deshaun alluded to, are just pretty hard to deny. So you begin to have project high rises created in places like St. Louis, New York, and in Chicago. And this created, Stephen, even greater levels of hypersegregation. So people were already very isolated from the city, right? Now, when you get these projects, people are just totally almost in another world. So you live in New York. So again, I'm sure, I hope y'all have seen New Jack City. And y'all saw, well, in New Jack City, there have the projects were called the Carter. You probably have heard the 17 Lil Wayne albums. Well, then again, maybe not. Lil Wayne has 17 albums called the Carter. I'm exaggerating, but just barely. It is, a fiction, play off his name, of course. But also, it's a reference to the Carter Projects, which were fictionalized in New Jack City. That's where Pookie got killed and stuff. Spoiler alert. But since it's damn near 30 years old, sucks to be you. Whatever the case, that in many ways was represented and played out in many cities across the country, because the projects, again, nobody cared. The police, couldn't really get up in there. It was incredibly dangerous. And in short order, many gangs and drug kingpins across the country, they would take those projects and kind of utilize them as their factories. So the same type of process that worked with the Industrial Revolution, But the people that lived in the projects, they weren't getting access to those industrial jobs. They were isolated. So they used the projects in many cases to create their own industrialized markets. Some of the model projects, again, this was done all across the country through the Urban Renewal Act. And whenever you see something in italics, that's something that you want to familiarize yourself with in studying and preparing for the exam. And this issued government subsidized housing. This came under the recognition, and again, this is the important part that you really need to be writing down, not just what you see on the screen, But this Urban Renewal Act came from the recognition that you had so many people that were coming up looking for jobs, ended up not being able to find them, but they needed somewhere to live. A lot of times they could not afford housing themselves, so the government would assist them and pay part of their rent, and they would get reduced rents. But again, and many people, oftentimes people that haven't lived or have any idea what like public housing life is like, oftentimes said people that are very economically removed from that situation will make comments like, that these people are getting over it. That's some kind of hustle to be living in public housing or Section 8 housing. This is a ridiculous mindset, because the housing that you were getting there was not the most quality of housing. And like I said, it was a situation that made it very difficult if you were living in one of these housing projects. It made it very difficult to escape poverty. Let's look closely at Pruitt-Eagle first in St. Louis. We've talked at length in social science classes about how the environment is really important in terms of shaping human behavior. And we see this here in this particular project and others. And keep in mind that even though the final exam is not cumulative, how this information ties in together. And we've discussed how Le Corbusier, one of the leading architects and urban planners that we talked about in earlier sections, particularly in some of the things he built in Paris. And, I've had an opportunity actually to go to Paris and see some of the projects that are designed there as well. And it's mainly for people that are migrating from Northern Africa, Arabs that have migrated to France and stuff, that are generally housing their quote unquote housing projects here. They don't call them projects, but they're low income housing. This is some time ago, so I'm not sure the extent that those still are standing, but the point being, you can see the consistency across cultures and how they are structured and built. And the way that they were built, again, is a really important part of the story. So again, you see, you have all these people, housed in this small, structure. Oftentimes, in spite of having all these people, there will be one elevator, and anybody who's been anywhere near a project will know that very oftentimes that elevator is broke. And ain't nobody finna come fix it. So people, again, you're going grocery shopping, and if the one elevator is working, it takes all day, for it to come up and down. And oftentimes you have to go upstairs. A lot of times, again, people have knocked the lights and stuff out of the stairs, so somebody's mumming coming up a dark stairwell with no lights, ain't no telling what's going on. It's not a very conducive environment here in Pruitt-Eagle for people to really interact in a communal type of way. We discuss how the city environment oftentimes is portrayed as not really being inviting and facilitating community and fellowship. The project's design definitely kind of facilitates some of that, unfortunately. As we said, whether it be the lighting, the hallways, or what have you, it made it easier to rob and rape people. Little kids would not really be encouraged to go outside and play, not only because it wasn't safe or they may be prey to some of the gang activity outside, but the structure made it, where they couldn't see their kids, once they left their homes. Again, like I said, many people that have had the luxury and privilege of not living near, government housing of this nature will often see the reduced prices alone and view it as some kind of come up. But the walls and the structure, again, where, the walls will be almost made out of paper mache. Oftentimes these buildings, like, this one in particular, became hugely rat and roach infested. And after just 5 years, it became uninhabitable. Another major housing project that got a lot of attention throughout its history was the Robert Taylor Homes in Chicago. This is actually the largest housing project in the entire country. They knocked it down, 2020? Maybe about 15 years ago now, maybe 20. Time flies. But it was then like, most of my life, just would be block after block after block after block after block of project housing on the south side of the city. So although it says here the last decade, the slide's a little bit older, so it's been longer than that. It's been longer than 10 years that Robert Taylor and Cabrini Green. Cabrini Green is another famous project in Chicago. Cabrini Green is where JJ and the fine Thelma Evans lived. You go over there now and it's like all types of Starbucks and Kias, like it's just totally been transformed. It's amazing. But one of the things that it also came with a lot of controversy, and bear with me here in terms of the tearing down of the projects, and that the housing structure themselves were not very ideal. They weren't safe. Like I said, Robert Taylor and other projects, Cabrini Green, Ida B. Wells, Algale Gardens, others, oftentimes were very much controlled by the gangs in Chicago. They again didn't really facilitate people really like going outside at all and engaging community. So they were more than problematic. As a quick note, like in Cabrini Green in particular, one of the mayors, she actually spent I want to say like a week in Cabrini Green because there was a whole bunch of crime and just made him go in there. And she's like, hey, look, I want y'all to know that Cabrini Green is safe. How safe is it? I'm going to live in the projects myself for a week. That was wonderful publicity stunt. but it's not quite the same. So there were definitely problems there, but one of the things that happened, and we'll talk about this in a moment in terms of gentrification, is where they relocated those people. That, for better or for worse, many people have built their lives, around that community and where they live. And the solution for many, right, they put them in what would be called mixed income housing. But a lot of times people be really deeply relocated. In fact, many of these people, as we'll talk about, end up being relocated out of Chicago. Because again, even though this is the projects, this was actually a prime real estate. It wasn't like, it was a bad area of town because of the economic development. But as far as the real estate, like it was, near a lot of things that people wanted to get access to. It wasn't like it was in the far outskirts. But once the projects were torn down, they relocated those people to the outskirts, and mainly into suburban Chicago. And a lot of those areas now are settled by a lot of upper middle class white folks. And this has changed the nature of the city. It's changing the nature of the city slowly but surely. We see this also again in the project in Stuyvesant Town in Lower East Side Manhattan. And this is originally designed to house middle class folks. And what it speaks to here is that the way that you build your projects or build your public housing and how you go about structuring it can have an impact upon how people behave and the extent that they can get in and out of poverty. Because the problem with the ghetto, in the scientific definition of the word, and being in a hyper-segregated community, is that it limits your opportunity for upward mobility. And it kind of makes it where poverty just gets recycled generation after generation after generation. In many Black neighborhoods, of the South, the Waverly neighborhood originally, for example, even though it was segregated, you would have dentists and doctors and lawyers and clergymen all living on the same block with people that might be in poverty. Those neighborhoods have a very different type of vibe and energy and economic activity than neighborhoods where it's only poor people. So Stuyvesant Town is a case study in this that was highly successful. It had well-maintained apartments. It was linked again by walkways where people again could walk around. They had lawns and parks for children to play and stuff. Increasingly, more and more of these cities are falling into what you all are familiar with, I'm sure, a concept called gentrification. And this is what I talked about again, in Southside Chicago, in Harlem, New York, in Philly, in Georgetown, no doubt in New Orleans post-Katrina, where you had lower income communities that people had lived in for generations. And again, it's not even that people always want to move. It's just like, I don't want to move. I would like to live here. I just want y'all to actually take care of the housing. I want y'all to take care of the roads. I want you to put a grocery store across the street. I want you to put a post office nearby. I want you to put some street lights up. But I would like to live here. I don't want to move, way for in the outskirts. But increasingly, when you have more and more of these upper class people moving in, so Brooklyn and places like that, for example, you have a lot of young white professionals and some Black, but mainly young white professionals moving into an area like Brooklyn because it's the cool, hot neighborhood. It's literally a free country, so I'm not totally mad at that. But in very short order, a lot of times, it prices the people that lived there previously out of the community. And you get neighborhoods that become like almost all white. For 5 extra credit points, does anybody know the origin of the term gentrification? When we talk about gentrified neighborhoods such as Georgetown, Society Hill, and Soho in New York, what does gentrification mean exactly? Well, perhaps you can answer this as well. Explain the difference between demand side and supply gentrification in your own words. Take a couple of moments on that and then we'll open up a discussion. Demand side gentrification and supply side gentrification. This is an example of the type of question that you might see on the quiz or the final exam. We want to practice such questions here today. All right, you can continue to finish up on your responses as needed. But what do we have so far on this side in regards to these questions? The demand and supply side gentrification. What are the contrasts there?
The demand side of gentrification talked about the culture, and the quality of life. Then the supply side went to argue that the about economics and stuff like that.
Okay. Other thoughts?
But
Other thoughts?
I did read where it said something about the fan area. The fan areas of where it went down was Georgetown, Society Hill, Yorkville, Low East Side, and Soho.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Any other thoughts on either of these questions?
Uh, when you asked about the origin of gentrification, like does the origin gentrification come like when wealthy individuals they go to a neighborhood and they try to revamp it or transform it in a sense?
Not necessarily. I mean, that's not the like meaning of gentrification. And I was asking like, so in a book, it gives you the root word, the word that it originates from, and the idea that is evolved from there. So that's what I meant by that particular question.
Oh, gotcha.
Well, Dr. Muhammad, they also to go back on your definition of gentrification, I see it said when rich people go into low poverty neighborhoods and change it up. To go back, you gave us an example of that earlier when you said about Chicago and the project homes, Robert Taylor homes. I guess it was the other one where now you see Starbucks and stuff like that in the neighborhoods. Is that the example?
Absolutely.
Right.
And another example of that is in New York City, south of Houston, even though it's spelled like Houston, it's pronounced Houston. This was once an industrial section of New York City. It quickly transformed into an artist-based community. But now, again, like as you have more and more people, yuppies, if you will, moving into this area of New York, a lot of the artists are being priced out. And again, the irony of this is that one of the reasons why a lot of the people wanted to move to this area of town is because you have so many artists there. But once you have like, stock brokers and bankers and the like, moving into the area, the real estate prices transform pretty quickly, and the character community changes as well. We also see this at work in our nation's most expensive housing market in San Francisco. The big problem with a lot of this, again, we talked about how some people get priced out of communities and they may have to go live in other places. Some people, unfortunately, aren't able to make that transition, and a great deal of many people end up on the streets in these major cities. It's hard to get a precise number on homelessness. The estimate that you want to keep in mind as you prepare for the quiz and exam is as few as 350,000, and perhaps as many as 2 million. My sense is probably on that higher side. The early manifestations of homelessness in America, at least that we have data of, this was characterized amongst, white males who in their 50s. A lot of times, unfortunately, people that had aged out of the labor market. However, increasingly, we have more and more females, and specifically, we have a lot more women with children that are experiencing this. Oftentimes, homelessness is viewed as, something that a personal shortcoming on the individual. But as we talked about it, again, it's really important that, like I said, we don't just go through this and only take the notes, but really get a true understanding of these processes, and not only just as an academic, but just as an informed citizen. Because, we just described some of the processes that led to this homelessness as it relates to people being priced out of their communities. So it's not just based something that's solely off of poor character, but it's also related to housing prices. As we talked about before, insufficient affordable housing policies. And just the cultural images of those in power, where, again, there's just not a lot of empathy sometimes for certain communities in their challenges to find secure housing. On Friday, we'll begin our discussion on gender in the city. You all have a wonderful afternoon.